Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed some of the Lunch and Learn sessions. We're back now with a very interesting panel session, and I'm delighted to have as the host for the panel, Jennifer Houston, who's the SVP of Global Marketing and Public Affairs at DWave. She's been in marketing and communications in the technology and software industry for over 20 years. And from personal experience, I know that she spends every day working with DWave customers to try and bring real business value to them from today's quantum computers. So, Jen, a pleasure. The floor's yours.
Thank you, Amit. It's so lovely to be here. This has been such a great conference so far, and we're just thrilled to dig into what are real practical applications that people are doing with quantum today. But I have three incredible panelists that I'd like to introduce. Hans Melo, and then I have Sam Mugel, and I have Ivan Ostojic. And I think I've just ruined his last name, so I apologize, Ivan. Let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Hans is a computer scientist and an entrepreneur with a passion for solving world problems using emerging technologies. And wait till you hear for the kinds of things that Hans and team are working on. He's a machine learning researcher and practitioner, and his expertise lies in reinforcement learning and combinatorial optimization using quantum hardware. In 2018, he actually worked on DWave's QBoost algorithm, and he won the Quantum Machine Learning Hackathon at the Creative Destruction Lab for that work. So he's one of our, part of our very important ecosystem of developers who are helping us make these products even better. Hans co-founded MentenAI to apply quantum computing and machine learning to computational protein design for use cases in the pharmaceutical and chemical industries. He's a lovely human being as well, and he's in Sweden today, so we're so glad you're joining us today, Hans. Sam Mugel is the co-founder of Multiverse Computing, which provides software for companies from the financial industry, which want to gain an edge with quantum computing. Multiverse's fields of expertise are portfolio optimization problems, risk analysis, and market simulation. He's also a computational physicist at Corderino, which provides portable wearable brain imaging, which can be used at the scene of an injury to enable faster clinical decisions, reduce time to treatment, and improve outcomes from patients. So thank you so much for being here, Sam. I know you have a lot of really interesting things to talk about. And then Ivan. Ivan leads McKinsey's innovation work in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, where he advises clients across a variety of sectors on strategic business models, organizational approaches that ultimately drive innovation. He has a deep expertise in leveraging digital solutions and advanced analytics to foster innovation at scale. And he often applies these when he's advising clients across the technology-driven industries such as pharma, biotech, life sciences, chemicals, energies, and advanced industries. So welcome to Sam and Ivan and to Hans. So glad you're here today. So, you know, I'm going to start a little high. We'll start big and then we'll go into the details, because I think what our listeners are probably looking for is how do we ensure that we not only move from this grand idea that is quantum computing, but move into the practical application. So I'm going to start, Ivan, what kind of trends are you seeing? I mean, you talk to clients around the world solving very, very hard problems. What kind of trends are you seeing in quantum computing?
Well, I'm going to talk about, industry back, because we have much deeper technical experts here than I am. So we spent a lot of time over last year with our technology council that I also lead with our clients talking about quantum. And there are kind of a couple of learnings. So one is, I would say, mobilization. There is also curiosity and a lot of questions around impact. And this was on high level, so I'll explain each of them very briefly. So in mobilization, we see kind of three types of clients. Some of them that think their industries could be disrupted with quantum. And actually, the quantum is becoming topic on the agenda of their executives, but more kind of watch and monitor, maybe do some experiments, but it's really linked to the corporate executive agenda. There is another group of clients which is more kind of push this to the expert groups, and they're playing around, but not really tied to some roadmap or how it could disrupt us. Just let's get some experience. And the third ones are more, I would say, skeptics in a way. Then the second trend is actually there is a lot of acceleration and a lot of sort of hype, but by common press. And I don't know if the depth of understanding is really big or deep enough, on the corporate side. And so I think we as a community, including people here who are listening, would probably need to spend more time educating and separating hype from reality and helping them get in the flow of this disruptive technology. And the third trend, I would say, it's actually what we see much more on policy side, where we have a lot of work. There is a wave of strategic financing coming from different players in the ecosystem. Everybody understands disruptive nature of quantum and what could bring. And actually, a lot of them are continents, governments. Just the other day, Dutch government announced 600 million investment. There are many around the world are starting to think, actually, what's our agenda to build the ecosystems? And I think with that, with strengthening educational programs, I think we might see actually a much bigger kind of exponential acceleration, recognizing technology's constraints and what we can do and cannot do today. So that's in a nutshell. We could spend a lot of time.
What a great way to start us off. And we will circle back to sort of the educating the workforce at some point in the conversation, because I think that's a key part, as well as sort of the different, I like how you talk about the different phases and sort of different levels. I don't even know if I use the word maturity, a little bit more about sort of risk tolerance within the different organizations and how they're approaching it. So let's go from really high level. I want to actually go to Hans, because, you know, one of the key areas that quantum is, you know, going to be having major impact in and is beginning today is pharma and life sciences. And so I guess, you know, at a bigger question, how does one decide what is good technology for drug design? Where did you start, you know, when you started thinking about, you know, the role of not just quantum, but technology in protein design?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That's a great question. So, you know, the way we think about it at Menten is really simple. We just think problem, solution, right? Or, you know, nail, hammer, right? So for us, we really come down to what is the mathematical problem we're trying to solve? What are the tools that are available to us today? How likely are those tools to actually solve the problem? Or do we need something else, some new technology? And so that's really the framework that we use for everything we do at Menten. And in terms of the pharma and biotech industry, there are a lot of problems, right? There's a lot of really interesting problems, mathematical problems that have been outstanding for, you know, for decades. Now, one of those problems, in more specific to our case, is the problem of protein folding and the inverse problem of protein design. And just to kind of give everyone an idea what that means, protein folding is basically, if you heard the news a couple of weeks ago, Google or DeepMind rather, solving this problem is you have a sequence of amino acids, and all of these sequences fold into specific shapes. And those shapes become the structure of a protein. And the shape, the structure gives its function, its you know, core functionality to anything going on in nature, including ourselves and our bodies. And just really big summary, some of those proteins go awry, they have problems, and then we have to find a way to stabilize them and solve the problems. And that's where drugs come in, of course, right? But the problem with drugs is, how do we find the right molecule? How do we navigate the landscape of billions and billions of possibilities to know which molecule do we need in order to target a specific protein? And so that is the kind of challenge that we at Menten and others are looking into. And one of the key points where we think quantum can become helpful. And we have actually seen some early results of that. And yeah, really, really excited to keep you know, having that discussion.
That's great. That's great. Well, we'll come back to that, because I think there's more about sort of getting started and how you got there. Sam, I want to understand from you. I mean, you sort of look at I know financial services is sort of your area, but I know you think much more broadly based on your background. And what are some of the emerging use cases that you're seeing broadly? And then how are you seeing that trickle down into financial services as well?
Great question. Thank you. I think I've really been seeing a transition relative to when I finished my PhD back in 2016. There's been a transition in the problems that people have been addressing. Back then, a lot of problems were coming out with toy models, such as portfolio optimization, arbitrage opportunities, and things like that, tackling like 5 or 6 assets and things like that. However, now I'm really seeing problems of commercial value that are emerging with really like data sets of valuable dimensions in this case. And I think what's driven this transition is very much a change in QPU and machine capabilities, and also change in algorithms. We've got much more elaborate ways of fitting problems onto QPUs, essentially. I think another transition I've also seen is a transition in expectations. 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of clients would come up to us and say, hey, we'd really like to do some quantum application. Let's pioneer this type of problem by doing a little toy model today. And nowadays, I'm seeing clients come up to us asking us to solve problems of commercial values. A lot of them are even saying stuff like, hey, I've had this crazy idea for years. It's been impossible to implement. Let's see if we can solve this now with quantum computing. And some clients even come to us at Multiverse and say, let's jump straight to an MVP. Let's just skip proof of concepts entirely. So that's been a really interesting time there.
That really is an interesting trend, because I think, especially if you balance it to Ivan's comment about sort of balancing hype and reality, I think all of us have seen that there are problems that are not appropriate for quantum computing. They're either not intractable, they don't fit the way that the systems can take those problems in, but they are increasingly, as we uncover, as quantum pioneers, we uncover these new areas where the math works. There are real things being done. So actually, let's talk a bit about one of the things that I often get asked, and I have the luxury of talking to so many potential customers and customers around the world. One of the things I often get asked is, what is the key to building a successful algorithm, a successful equation? How do you think about, the math? How do I it's not just even how do I get started, but how do I think about the math? What are the elements of a successful algorithm? I'm going to first start with Hans, I'd like to hear from all 3 of you. Yvonne, so let's start Hans, Yvonne, and then we'll have Sam finish that up. So what are, you being practitioners of this, what are the things you have to start with?
Yeah, so it really comes down to, what it is that you're trying to solve and what kind of machine do you have available. Right? Is it a problem that you can solve on a computer today? If that is the case, then you can try that, right? But if it's a case of a very large optimization problem where the computer just don't exist today, right? And then maybe you say, oh, well, I have to wait 20 years before finding that out, right? And then of course there's the kind of the middle way that everyone's not really excited about, this hybrid approach. Right, where we can actually combine quantum, even today's quantum machines, with classical approaches. And we can try to figure out how can these two can synergistically work and actually tackle or begin to tackle the problems that we're interested in, right? And so I think there are a lot of different problems that even today we're beginning to solve. Optimization realm, I think, is one of the first applications. Combinatorial applications, right? So a lot of cases really comes down to just framing the problem in a mathematical way that is appropriate to the hardware. If you're able to do that, then you're halfway there. Then you have to implement it.
And I know that was part of your journey, just to
That's
see
exactly
if it was
right.
even possible, right? And
right.
Maybe tell a little bit more about that. What did you learn as part of that process?
Yeah, so it's a lot of exploration, right? So at first, exactly like you said, we have this hard problem, protein design. It's a hard optimization problem. It sounds like something that quantum could help with. And we know that we have a classical approach that works okay, but scales very poorly, right? So the moment we try to solve anything larger, you just can't really do it, right? And so we know we need some kind of new tools. And so the first question is, can we map this problem to quantum, right? So we, Menten and some collaborators, we worked on this, not even that long, really, for a couple of months, just to, as Sam said, to, a couple of years ago, to get a toy problem together. And we get that, right? So we got the toy problem, it worked. And the next question was, can we scale this up, right? Can we begin to solve larger problems? And can we actually begin to get into the realm using this hybrid approach that I spoke about earlier, where we can actually leverage, today's technology to have an impact in an industry. And for us, that means, can we begin to use these approaches to solve these protein design problems, effectively designing proteins? And we found out that yes, we could. And it's been an amazing journey. We've gone from, can we make this happen, to getting a toy problem, to actually implementing the problem, to scale into, a size where we could actually take these things to the lab, synthesize them. And I'll stop there, but it's been a great journey.
That's great. That's great. So I'm going to ask Yvonne the same question for you. You talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of customers. How do you help them think about sort of this, the thinking algorithmically? That's what we like to call it.
Yeah, no, so that's actually very good. And I think our experience, as you know, and also sometimes we spent together, it's we also have a quantum black, which we got in 2011. I mean, interesting, they're called quantum, but we are doing advanced analytics. But when we get in quantum, we learned there's like 30 PhDs or something there in quantum computing. So we are actually working on both sides, like business and analytics. And that was the reason I mentioned this, because we come from two angles. So how we help them think analytically, we start first business back. Okay, so if I look at your value chain, let's take pharma R&D. Where is the opportunity to use quantum to have immediate impact? So is it chemistry, or is it actually, protein folding, or it's both, and so forth? So we actually have a list of so it's use case back. And then what we do is we look at actually, what do we expect from this sort of experiment? Is it, are we just to learn something and convert it to something that's quantum inspired? Do we expect uplift? Is it the speed uplift? Or we actually, in some cases, we believe there might be even quality. So take something like missing data. Quantum computing can produce better distributions. So maybe the synthetic data we generate to impute missing variables will be better. So I'm just talking about, so we take, what do we expect? What's the outcome that we want to see? And then once we determine that that's business back, then it's actually thinking algorithmically in terms of, we have this term of business translator. So somebody who understands quantum enough, but business problem enough, so they can act as a translator, pairing with a deep sort of quantum scientist. And then it's really actually working problem back to translate to mathematical expression of the problem that can be used on a quantum machine. So, like in optimization problems, okay, we know from, let's say, DWave, we can solve very successfully quadratic problem to certain number of variables. Here is the list of client use cases. Which one of these would actually have chance to produce results? So we don't want to go in when we know there is no chance. And then actually, it's the framing the downstream. And so once we define the problem, once we define the algorithm, we are also thinking, what's the tech stack that's optimal for you? And what's the benchmark we are using for success? So we did a lot of artificial intelligence for, let's say, clinical trial optimization, which sites you select. Could be anything, could be what's the optimal distribution of patients in hospitals. And actually, because people already worked a lot on AI with that, here the benchmark, the control to convince executive this is helpful would be actually running it versus AI algorithm. In some cases, the control is zero because there is nothing, if you're trying to simulate some molecules. And we also determine that. And then based on that, we will build our algorithm, but also the tech stack, as Hans rightly say. In some cases, it's actually going to be more hybrid environment, and just some part of the problem will be varied on quantum, and you put it back And that's how we think. Like, so as I explained you, just to synthesize, level back and pass it then to Sam, it's really the problem. Then actually, how do we translate together with this business subject matter expert, business translator? How do we translate it into analytical problem? And then what's the optimal tech stack to achieve what we want to do? And what's the benchmark to convince that this is working in order to go to the next level? So that's a bit kind of on a high level, and I explained some thinking behind. And that's also we used in AI before, getting to larger scale in order to show the success cases. And I think that's kind of what Quantum will need to go through when technology is ready. So over here.
I think there's a lot of great learnings from sort of what we've learned from AI and sort of the processes and the thinking. You mentioned that this idea that there has to be a collaboration. And I think that's really one of the ahas. The people who are the experts in quantum aren't going to be the experts in the space that and that what you're likely your workforce is not ready in quantum. So actually, I want to ask Sam sort of the same question, but he's done a really good job of bringing sort of this bridge between quantum expertise and financial services expertise. So Sam, same question for you. What are the learnings around getting started in building a successful quantum algorithm? What are the things, because you've done a lot of this handholding. And then Hans, we've got a question from the audience. We'll answer Sam and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, there's been a lot, and yeah, it's great actually to be the third to answer this question, because I can bounce off many points that you've all said. Like, I think the most crucial item that I've really learned over the past 2 years is it's absolutely essential to understand where we bring value to a client. So to understand the customer experience, to understand, of course, like going back to what Ivan said, like the client journey and what they're expecting to get out of it. And for this, it's absolutely essential to have very, very short contact cycles with the client. I think because particularly in quantum, there's like Ivan said, there's an awful lot of hype, and this is something that in the end is quite destructive to us as people that are in this space. Like, it happens that sometimes clients come with really inflated expectations, and then it's really important to have a lot of communications to orient the project and understand what's actually doable. But also, going back to your point, very crucial to understand where we bring value and what we should be focusing on as a company, which is, in my case, we spend a lot of time focusing on the very low level implementation on the QPU, a lot less time focusing on equally interesting problems such as financial forecasting and things like how to exactly build this matrix, which are things that are very interesting open problems in finance, but not where we can add value as a company. Like, we're really focused, laser focused on the QPU. And finally, I wanted to, sorry, I've got a lot of notes, they're all in a mess. I wanted to bounce off of something that Hans said, that like you said, it's really, really important to understand the mathematical details that go into a problem, to understand where quantum can come in and accelerate that, well, give you an advantage, right? And this is where, like, we've got a real core strategy at Multiverse to understand the problem we're tackling and the client pain point really, really well. So we've done lots of hiring in people that are already at the bleeding edge of what classical computing can provide for these types of problems.
That's great. And I know that's sort of abstract until you sit down and actually build the algorithm and get detailed math. It's a little hard to do this on a group call here. But a couple follow-up questions, which I think are going to get us into more specifics of the applications that you've done. So Hans, I've got sort of two questions. First, I'm going to combine them together. The first part was sort of, how do the current results of solving protein design problems using quantum computer, how are those promising? You mentioned the word promising, so that's the first part. And then very specifically, someone said extending the capabilities of Rosetta Rosetta to QPacker is an amazing idea. Thanks for sharing your research. I'm wondering the largest molecule size of AA that QPacker can handle with DWave hardware. So I don't know if you can answer those questions, but I think also I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about sort of what your work has found and the areas that you're that you're particularly have a lot of interest in, because I know you have a lot of people talking to you about your work right now.
Yeah, sure, Jen. So thanks for the questions. So let me answer the first one in sort of a long way, right? What does promising mean? And to us, really is, as I mentioned earlier, we have a hard problem where we know classical approaches really limit us in the scope of what we can solve. Right? I mentioned that quantum computing may offer a different approach that may scale better, right? And so if we see any signal there in scaling, that would be promising, right? And so what we did, or what we've been working on is designing these little proteins at first. And so the way we started was, can we just have a toy problem as I expected? Can we map the problem, right? And this is a couple of years ago. And at that point, getting to the second question, we're talking about a 7 amino acid mini protein, right? So at that point, we realized, okay, we can A, map the problem. B, we can actually get similar results or same results as the classical solver, right? So there's validation. This might actually work. And the next couple of years, we've been working on, can we scale this up? How can we scale this up? And what would that actually mean for us as a company and for the field in drug discovery more generally? And so we've been doing different approaches, using hybrid approaches, just quantum pure, new algorithms, improving on previous methods to figure out how can we make this so that we can, tackle 10 amino acids, 15 amino acids, 30 amino acids, right? And this, by the way, are not just, toy problems or, the classical egg in a vacuum. Right? We want to figure out what is, the actual application that we can solve doing this. And so with the hybrid approach that we've been developing, we've actually been able to design the molecules up to around 60 amino acids. The largest we've been able to synthesize is around 32. And so that answers those questions. So we have seen how we can begin to scale these problems, right? We can see that we can actually design molecules that are, potentially useful. And actually, most recently, with the pandemic, with COVID, we realized that we could actually use this technology for a program for an COVID antiviral that we have in process. So this is a program that we actually developed entirely classically at first, developing a peptide that would essentially inhibit the virus from entering human cells. And at that point, we weren't sure that we could use quantum. So we say, let's do classical, right? We know classical works, let's do that. And so we designed, 25 molecules using that approach. And then we got some hits, right? And then at that point, we realized, okay, well, what if we actually try quantum here, right? Could we actually begin to solve these kinds of problems that are relevant, right, today? And so that's what we are working on now. And we have a second batch of molecules where quantum in the loop that are being, synthesized and tested against the virus. And so at this point, it's not whether, the quantum is better than the classical. It's just the fact that we begin to integrate this new technology into something that we could not do before, right? And so for us, that's what's really, really exciting about that work.
Yeah, that's incredible, Hans. I mean, just the innovation in thinking about new tools and expanding that, and what you can learn is just incredible. So thanks for that. So Sam, I'm going to go to you because you have done a lot of really interesting portfolio optimization work. Tell us a little bit about, let's make this real. What are the things, back to sort of the question, you know, I think it was a question for Hans, but I think it's also a question for you and ultimately for Ivan as well. What makes a quantum computer promising in finance? What are the things you're seeing?
Great. Well, I think the core message here is that, and going back to what Ivan was saying, we're really managing to make implementation of old algorithms that we just were not able to implement before. For instance, like recently with BBVA, which is the world's 40th something biggest bank, we were able to optimize a portfolio of investments of 8 assets over an 8-year period with monthly rebalancing. So this is an absolutely massive problem and very difficult because your optimal investments today are going to be highly dependent on yesterday and the day before's investments. But the really interesting thing about this was that we were able to account for the portfolio's risk exactly. And this is very, very difficult to do. Traditionally in finance, people assume that assume completely random and uncorrelated risk, and this can be a very destructive assumption. So this is actually the assumption that caused the 2008 subprime crash. So we've been able to do this, which was a really big win in collaboration with this bank, BBVA. And at the moment, we've actually just finished deploying this into a real-time investment optimization tool. So more updates about that soon.
Congratulations. I mean, that's the other thing I hear all the time is I'm here to just have a conversation with you about what's going to be possible in 10 years, right? And it's so fun to talk about how there are in production applications that are using hybrid quantum today. And I think we know, we've heard from Hans, we've heard from you and the work you've done with BBVA. There are others that are doing that. This is emerging, right? You're at the bleeding edge of it, but you are putting these things in production and using them today, which I think is somewhat surprising to the industry. So I would like to, I'm just watching our time. I want to make sure we've got more questions from the audience, which is great. You know, one of the things I get asked, there's 2 questions that I get asked all the time. Number one is sort of, how do you demonstrate the value of the role of quantum computing in our business? And I think we've danced around it a bit, but I want to come back to that. Hans was very clear. It's not just about classical versus quantum, but it's the ability to do something utilizing quantum and solve problems perhaps that at some point you wouldn't be able to solve classical. So I think that's one indicator. I would like to hear from Ivan about that and maybe next in just a sec. And then the second question that we always get is, how do I get started? This is, you know, do I have to be a physicist? Do I have to have a team of physicists? You know, how do I dip my toe in the water on this? So let's start with sort of, how do we measure value? Ivan, do you want to give some guidance about sort of how you help customers think about that?
It's a good question, but it's a little bit nuanced. The question is for whom? And I will explain from whom, right? Because I mean, if you look at companies, corporations, etc., you have, especially if you talk about big systems, right? You have people from executives down to, you know, sort of research scientists, etc. And, you know, to convince executives, and I guess we are not completely there yet, to start massive, I mean, it really needs to be something that actually can show us a substantial impact on P&L in a way, right? So they will measure just through the value. And, you know, the fact that you can do some optimizations, for example, and, you know, save costs on ranges of, let's say, 5 to some number of millions for a business that's relatively big, that's not going to excite them. But stuff that Sam was talking, like in finance, if I say, oh, I will improve your portfolio optimization 2%, I mean, that's actually really kind of, wow, I have, I don't know, billions under management, and 2% you can do the maths. So I'm going to do experiments there and see. So what is that sort of let's say, a financial metrics that you will be able to use in order to show, you know, benefits for the top line And for the bottom line, honestly, if they're meaningful, and there you will get much more into like classical versus AI. When I talk about bottom line, what do I do today, and how much is the value? And then there is a second one which is not measured by monetary impact, and that was a little bit what Hans was talking about, and so forth. If you map the industries and you look at the impact of quantum, there are some where the impact of quantum will be in percentages of P&L, where I said, because you are just doing things that you're doing today, but you will do them much better. You can price derivatives better, you can account for uncertainty. But there are some where the whole parts of the value chain will be completely disrupted. Take whatever, I mean, I don't want to shoot, but like lubricant industry. I mean, you can imagine how in some years down the road, when the technology is really mature, you could literally simulate, these mixtures and essentially completely different business model. You're moving from very implicit human-driven to very explicit, simulated business model. And those people are thinking really what's the future of their companies. And for them, the value is a bit different. Actually, they will measure value through a technical progress. I have some hypothesis, like exactly as Hans said, can I synthesize 30 amino acids protein using this? Because that's actually validation of hypothesis that in 3 years you will be able to do 200 amino acids when technologies. So they think a little bit almost like a VC or a business builder, right? What are the hypotheses that needs to hold true for me to know that I need to start investing more into these technologies? So the value is a little bit, that's why I said depends for whom. And whom has vectors of which industries, do they need to own or consume the technologies? Is it incremental or disruptive? And who in the organization? Because the scientist will be happy if the algorithm works. The executive will look at the higher level sort of impact. So that's a bit more, sorry to give you a complex answer on this question, but it's also not an easy question. We need to think in these vectors. Where is my industry? Who am I trying to convince that quantum is working? And then based on that, work back to define some value metrics. And it will fall into these two realms, either P&L driven realm or actually technical progress realm, where I'm validating certain hypotheses in order to convince ourselves that this will be useful for our business. Hence, I kind of surge the investments into it.
No, I actually think it's a really terrific observation, and thank goodness that the business framework is less complex than quantum computing, right? Even though you got a complex, it's not. We're not asking you to talk about quantum mechanics and that. So I actually think it's really you had a really interesting observation. We sort of have both types on the phone. We've got Sam, who's thinking through the lens of the value proposition of the financial value, and you have Hans thinking about the technical value. So Sam, you want to talk a bit about how you define value and what you're hearing from your customers as they're looking for value as it relates to quantum computing?
Yeah, okay, well, I'll tell you a story that bounces off of what Ivan was saying, was that, okay, for us, financial value is really everything at this point, right? So I've got my CEO, every time we're presenting new results to industry clients, he's always telling us, okay, we don't care about the results, just translate your results to euros. What does this mean in dollars for the client?
I love it.
Yeah, and it's tough because actually one issue we've had recently, which really goes hand in hand with what Ivan was saying, is that so we're working on a tax fraud detection application with a federal entity in Europe. And we were finding it very, very difficult to translate the result to euros, specifically because the capabilities we were giving them were completely new. So it's very difficult to tell them, oh, you're going to save this much on however much it costs you to do this process, because this isn't a process they were able to do before. So I think this is really one occasion where quantum machine learning is really allowing us to disrupt the present value chain. Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is you're experiencing both sort of the euros translation. So I think you had mentioned at some point that, like, for one of the case studies, 80% return on an investment portfolio which is euros. I love that. But you're also seeing the technical part of it. You're also seeing what technology can do and opening people's eyes into things that you weren't capable or weren't able to do before. And I think finding that balance, I didn't mean to put you in one bucket. I think that's a great observation that all of us have a responsibility. So what is possible? And I love the euros. We're going to steal that. That's okay. So Hans, same question to you. You've talked a bit about sort of the science. Do you have a euros piece of your story at a meta level yet?
I wish. I think, in our industry, in biotech, pharma, sales cycles are a lot longer, development cycles are a lot longer. We're talking about 10 to 15 years to bring a drug from discovery to market, $2 billion later, right? And so no one's breathing down our neck right now to tell us how much, they're gonna save or, I think value for us is really, as Ivan says, is primarily in the technical side. And within that, there's different kinds of value. There's a lot of people asking, okay, is it a 10x improvement? Is it a 100x? And again, it's fine because, if we can give a number to that, a linear number, we understand, right? We understand, okay, we're doing this, it takes, 1 year, right? If we do this, it will take a month. And that is true, using some of the techniques we've been working on, if they scale, we may be able to see some, time improvements, absolutely. But the most interesting question to me is actually the realization that it's not a 10x, 5x improvement. It's more of a 0 to 1 step function, right? Whereas we didn't have a way of solving this problem or tackling this kind of challenge, now we do, right? Where we didn't have a way of designing this kind of drug, now we do, right? Where we didn't have a way of tackling this disease, now we may have a way of doing that, right? And that's what, to me, that's really, really exciting, right? Whether, we do that entirely through quantum or through some hybrid approach or what have you, I think that's the real excitement, at least to me personally.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I tell people I have the best job in the world, and it's because not only are we bringing a new industry to, a new ecosystem, but who knows? We don't know what's possible. And so I think that we shouldn't step away from the value proposition there. So thank you. Okay, so we only have about 10-ish minutes left. We've got a couple more questions in the chat. I did want to ask each of you, and Yvonne, I'm going to go to you first. So what advice do you have for the people listening on what their next 3-4 steps should be? Practical advice for how to get started with quantum computing. What's your advice?
For the companies, right?
Yes, for the companies.
Assuming, because the value chain is very broad, right? I mean, there are component providers, hardware, software communities, and then let's say users. So I'm talking more about corporates that will use, because that's the receiving end on the market, assuming the experts will figure out everything before in the value chain. So I would say, for me, there are a couple of questions, just how to think about it, and then I'll give practical advice. So one is, is this technology going to disrupt me or add incremental value to what I'm doing? The second question is, which is correlated, so it's not mutually exclusive. Do I need to own this capability, or this is something where I go to Hans and I can do it because there is no risk for me that somebody take Hans's company from the market, or that I'm going to be disrupted and then I'm left without this capability? And if the answer is yes, it's very disruptive and I need to own it, I think my advice would be people really need to then do a proper strategy. Even if the use cases do not materialize now or etc., but you need to know from where are winds blowing, and where do I need to then build capabilities, and then you start getting into the flow to get an understanding of technologies to build your team. I think fight for talent will be fierce, because if the demand really and technology follows the current, let's say, curve, we are not making enough sort of people. So people will need to align to build capabilities. It's all going to be around the speed for those that are going to be disrupted. So you really need to align. On the other hand, if it's incremental value and I can sort of, be consumer, then I still as a strategy consultant, suggest having a strategy. But I think it's quite okay for next few years, while technology is maturing, to do targeted experiments and sort of, just get into the flow without like a big swing, big teams and so forth, but really just as a first-hand wave of experimentation, learning about technology. So I think that would be number one. And then from there, from the strategy and the use cases, as we discussed, everything follows. You should actually have multiple tech streams, to think what your tech stack would look like. You should have like a team that's sort of onboarded and so forth. So those are then step 2, step 3 that follows the step 1. And you need to just decide, when do you trigger which step? When do I start scaling up the team? Working with different tech stacks for my different problems. So when it's mature enough that we make investment and so forth, not to belabor more. But I think that follows then that thinking. But I think those are my kind of on a high level, 2 buckets, how I like to simplify things. And then if you really have to have a strategy and follow, there are multiple kind of steps on the talents, on the delivery model, on the ecosystem of partners. I don't think Quantum will be owned by any single company. So people need to build ecosystems. And on the tech stack and so forth, that follows that strategy in particular. So that's a bit my sort of a view on it. And then just last conclusion on the strategy, which is very important, are these roadmaps. Because I think if you talk now to executives, including your own CEOs, I think many are saying we are not anymore having question if the quantum is coming, it's more when. So if you are on the receiving end of the company, you should have a roadmap with clear triggers. And when certain trigger happens, you start tuning up your investments. It could be that you delay because the technology, okay, there was some people talk about quantum winter. I hope it doesn't happen. But there is a delay. So you will delay your roadmap, but it's quite important to be flexible and have it kind of figured out sometime in advance. Because later on with this fight for talent and so forth, it's very difficult when you miss the wave of the S-curve to catch it up in any technology, but it will be particularly true in quantum.
Thank you, Ivan. So Sam, same question to you, but I'm going to ask you to a little shorter because we have a lot of questions to the audience. I want to make sure we get to them. 3 pieces of advice in getting started on, in quantum computing.
Same question as Ivan said. Am I talking to companies or individuals?
Companies. Let's talk about companies, businesses,
Great.
enterprises.
So I think the most successful companies that I've seen getting started in quantum usually have an in-house like reading group and really like encourage crazy projects. They put a little bit of time and little bit of budget into bringing in experts, maybe like interns that are finishing their master's projects or something, and supervised by people in-house and gain expertise this way. And then what generally happens is these types of companies, they already have a little bit of experience about the capabilities of quantum that will then reach out to companies like us at Multiverse and say, well, wanting to learn from a startup. And I think the last thing I'd like to say about that is I'd really encourage you maybe not to reach out for free consulting, but have a little pot of money to do like moderately priced proof of concepts and learn from experts and develop your in-house knowledge like this.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. Hans, same question to you. 3 things or 2 things. What are your pieces of advice having gone through this and having done this for a couple of years now? And then a follow-up question is, someone had asked, are there any other in-production applications out there that the panelists know about? I think your work is in production, if others want to jump in, but I'll let you start with the sort of, what advice would you give the group?
Yeah, so start today or yesterday. That's 1. 2, have a dedicated person or team fully engaged. And 3, what Sam said, have an actual budget for doing this work. It is the early days, but there is the potential is huge. You wouldn't want to miss out or lose on an edge that your competitors might get.
Yeah. And to the question of other in-production applications, I know that there is a grocery store chain in Canada that is piloting a grocery optimization in 50 some odd stores right now, utilizing the DWave, the Advantage hybrid approach. I know Hans has his is in production. I know the work that I think the BBVA comment, there are not hundreds of them, there are tens of them, but these tens are increasingly moving into, and so at DWave, we talk about sort of the 4 phases. First is, so my advice would be discovery. You probably don't even know which problems are the right ones. That's the first place that any of these groups, whether they be consultancies or the actual vendors, we can help you think about which problems are right for the quantum computer. Not all problems are right for the quantum computer. Second phase is really, okay, so how does the math happen? How do we start mapping these problems algorithmically into the systems? Third phase is really the pilots or the field trials, depending on where you are, and then ultimately moving pretty quickly into in-production applications. And we're seeing timeframes on that being anywhere from, a 6 to 12 month sort of journey from first through third phase, and then very quickly moving into in-production. So to answer that question, I think we have time for maybe one more question or 2 more questions. Here's a good one. Any framework or guidance on how we are mapping near-term use cases with monetary impact with the current state of technology? Further, how to define and create a value proposition for longer-term use cases where ROI is not near-term? Thanks. So I think what they're asking is, knowing that the technology is maturing, knowing that some have euros, some have technical value, how do we help? What kind of frameworks or guidance would this group give? Ivan,
so maybe Jen, I know it's not definite answer, but I will give it. So in our technology council, as you know, Alan is a member, and Sam, and many others, there's maybe 20, 30 kind of external companies, and we are actually working on this problem. So we will put out public model sometime, and we did, which was very fierce and difficult discussion, because people have different view. What is NISC? What's not NISC? Can we do something in NISC? Can we not do? I mean, and you can imagine there are different companies that have different technologies in these forums. We're actually first defining the eras of quantum computing. So there is some sort of now kind of very early era where mainly you're solving mathematical problems, and we will progress to a few stages, faster or slower, depending who you ask. And to each of these, we are touching probable industry-backed use cases. And then if those use cases, it's important not to boil down to one number, but actually say, 10% more drugs or whatever. And we are trying to quantify that and build a model. So I think that's a little bit how you would do it, right? You need to go back from the use cases, map what we will be able to do with that hardware at the time, together with the experts, and then say what impact will that use cases have on industry. And that's total value created. And then how it's distributed through the value chain, it's a different question. And we will put the first model of that. I don't say it will be 100% right. And it's not just McKinsey, it's all these people building some on the calls. So there will be, and maybe that helps spur that discussion. So that's for now.
That's great. So the answer is McKinsey's got a framework that's coming out. Watch this space. At least that's a place to start. So we haven't.
But it's really aligning to eras of technology. So you need to think about, more granular than NISC and non-NISC, and then a little bit, what will that technology enable us to do in terms of use cases, and then quantifying the value of those use cases. That's kind of on a high level.
That's awesome. And what I love about that is we're talking about real business problems and how to find value in that. We're not talking about, does the technology work? And I think that's been one of the hangovers of the space, especially the providers. We spend a lot of time asking, does the technology work? Not how do we add value to business? So really excited to hear you say that. Okay, so time for one more question. I think it's a really good one. It says, where do you see the most tangible, measurable quantum computing advantage? And I don't mean advantage in the big sense. Within, is it simulation? Is it optimization? Or is it quantum machine learning in this time right now? Or is it something else? Where if you could say, what is the, in a generic way, what is the most important use case around quantum today? What is that? With what you can use today? Who wants to go first?
I can give a super quick answer.
Great.
And I'm sure Ivan in the model, they'll have a much more fleshed out. I think near-term optimization is a good way to go. Yeah. If you have a problem that can be mapped to some kind of optimization mathematical equation, that's a good start.
That's great. Sam, what are your thoughts?
Totally agreed. Before we started the company, we set out to look at all the verticals in finance, and optimization. We were just like, that's where the low-hanging fruits are. But the holy grail is machine learning stuff. There's so many open, really difficult problems in machine learning.
And I'm getting the wrap up. So Yvonne, can you answer in 10 seconds? What's your answer?
I agree with optimization. We also map that as an immediate long-term, and then depends on the industry. One vector is quantum machine learning for some industries, and the other is simulations for chemistry, pharma, and the like.
Thank you, Hans and Sam and Yvonne. I cannot tell you how much I've appreciated this conversation. We said we wanted to have fun. I know there's some questions we didn't get answered. We'll collect those and make sure that we get back to those who asked. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and get started in quantum computing. Take care, all. Bye.